Good evening, everybody. It's 6 o'clock, so we will start tonight's committee meeting. And before we begin, can I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? And if a participant wishes to speak, can they please raise their hand in person if sat in the chamber, or use the remote raise hand function if joining us remotely. If a participant raises their hand via the remote function and is not subsequently invited to speak by me, could they turn their camera on to indicate they wish to speak or place a message in the chat function? And when invited to address committee by myself, please could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure that they can be seen and heard when actively participating. If this isn't possible for any reason, please bring it to the attention of the Democratic Service Officer or myself as soon as possible. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when addressing committee, please let myself or Democratic Services Officer know. So please can I welcome all committee and non-committee elected members, cabinet members, our officers, members of the public who are in attendance, and also to anyone who is watching the live meeting broadcast. And moving straight on to the agenda and beginning with apologies for absence. Do we have any, please?
Yes, we do, Chair. Councillor Iannucci Williams, the Vice Chair, sends her apologies.
Thank you very much. Anything from anyone else? No. Okay, thank you. Moving on to the minutes of the previous meeting from the 21st of May 2024. Are members happy with those minutes? And can I have somebody to move? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. And can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Norman. Happy to second? Yes, I see your hand is up. Thank you. And then just to note that Councillor Driscoll's apologies for May's meeting didn't arrive in time for the completion of the minutes and the decision notice. But as chair, I'm happy to note those apologies unless there are any objections from any committee members. If so, now's your chance to tell me. No, good, no hands up. So we will please note Councillor Driscoll's apologies for the previous meeting in May. And on to declarations of interest. Are there any, please? No, I see no hands. Thank you. Committee, just to advise you that we're joined tonight by a member of the public who wants to speak to agenda item 5. And I'd like to take that agenda item next, unless there are any objections. So Mrs. King is able to leave us if she wishes and enjoy the rest of her evening. Are there any objections if I take agenda item 5, which is about school crossing supervisors, next? No, and again, I see no hands, so thank you. So we move then to agenda item 5. As I've said, this is the petition submission school crossing supervisors. As I've mentioned, we're joined by the lead petitioner, Mrs. Paula King, who will speak first on the petition, which received 116 signatures. Welcome, Mrs. King. You have 3 minutes to address the committee, starting whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of my community. I'm here to ask that you reconsider the removal of our crossing guards. Our lollipop lady is more than just someone doing her job or providing a service. She is a well-known, friendly face and a reassuring presence for parents. She knows all the children by name and all the parents trust her. For 13 years, Julianne has kept our children safe while crossing the road to and from school. She gives the children reassurance and teaches them how to cross safely. Without her, I know that parents would not let their children walk or cycle to school on their own, and that means their independence is taken away and more parents will end up driving to school. Our school actively encourages more walking and cycling to school in order to help the environment and to increase health and fitness. So we really do need that added layer of protection that Julianne provides. Unfortunately, St Athan Primary School is unable to fund a crossing guard ourselves, not on our already very low budget. It's just not possible. The cuts to the school crossing guards would not make a big difference either way to the Vale's overall financial position, and the cuts should not be being made where child safety is concerned. Road traffic injury is the leading cause of death among children and is the fourth leading cause of death in children between the ages of 5 to 14 years. Also, data from the European Union shows that children are often involved in traffic accidents in residential areas near schools. As you are aware, road traffic injuries are preventable through effective measures, and our crossing guard is an effective measure and has been for many years. While she's been in position, no child has been involved in a traffic accident while crossing with her. We do have a light control crossing in the village, but it's completely unsuitable for crossing children as it's on a blind bend and directly outside a pub car park, which is busy with cars coming and going regularly. Where Julie stands, you can get a clear view of the traffic coming from both directions. The same cannot be said for the location of the other crossing. Once Julianne has crossed the children, it's a straight walk directly to the school along the path. On the other hand, if you were to remove our crossing guard, the children on the way out of school would still have to cross a very busy road unsupervised just to get to the light control crossing. This particular road has large farm vehicles coming in and out of it regularly, as there is a cow farm right next to the school. We surely must all agree that a child's life is worth more than the amount of money said to being saved by this cut. So from St Athan Primary School and the parents and the children of St Athan Village, we urge you to reconsider this cut and allow us to keep our crossing guard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. King. And we're joined also this evening by Miles Punter, the Director of Environment and Housing, who's prepared a report for us in response to the petition. So, Miles, would you like to talk us through that now? Thank you.
Certainly, Chair. Thank you. And thank you, Mrs. King, for your submission. If I could take members through just a bit of background to this position. So that starts at 2.7 of the report, which is in front of you this evening. So essentially, the council had to set a balanced budget for 24-25, and this was extremely challenging, probably one of the most challenging budget setting processes I've been involved in, and I've been here a considerable amount of time. The Directorate had to save around £2 million, so £1.89 million. And we tried in our budget setting process to best protect education and social care services, and also to protect housing and public protection. And what this actually meant is that a large amount of the savings in my directorate went on one division, which is neighbourhood services and transport, and this equated to roughly 7%. So the budget meeting for the council was on the 6th of March 2024, and it featured 34 individual savings lines and projects for the neighbourhood services and transport division. 33 of these savings and income projection lines were agreed as part of the budget process. So the matter has been through this committee and has been through the council and cabinet previously. None of the projects identified were straightforward. All of them had some form of impact either on our residents or visitors or both. In terms of this particular saving, it was suggested that there would be a review of the service and for us to contact schools to see if they would be willing to take on some of the roles. So we had 11 staff at the time, over 10 sites. One of them is a floater who covers all the sites. And we asked the schools, wrote to them all and said, would you be able to take on this service, either in part or in full, or would you have volunteers that would be prepared to take the service on? So all of them wrote back, as Mrs. King has explained, saying that they got severe budget challenges of their own. They recognise how important the service is, that they would like to help if they could, but they're unable to. So on the basis of those responses, we considered the position, and whilst we still need to review the safety around schools, because one of the ways you can reduce the costs is to produce properly located pedestrian crossings, whether they be light control or zebras. We have no plans currently to forcibly remove any staff from the service. We've managed to find 83,000 of the £100,000 saving that we previously identified from other sources. So we're almost to the figure that we needed to find. So we had hoped, in summary, that there would be some support from the school in terms of the service. there hasn't been. The council is in no desire to put any additional risk on any child or parent that goes to these schools, so they will remain as they are, and we will review the actual pedestrian crossing points over time to see if they will benefit from some form of either light controlled or zebra. Just to say that we have been reducing these staff over a number of years. So we started off with over 30 staff a few years ago, and with crossings being introduced and with 20-mile-an-hour zones being introduced in front of schools, we've been able to reduce them somewhat. But there's no further plans for these school sites other than to review them to see if we can look at crossing opportunities and to see whether a reduction in the staffing over time by a natural process is appropriate or not. But we've spoken to the staff concerned. They were clearly worried about their jobs, and we've hopefully put their minds at rest. So as far as this review and this budget item is concerned, there's no changes planned for the existing staff at those sites. Chair, if you'd like, I'll tell you where those sites are. So St Iltyd's Primary, Llanfric Comprehensive School, Ysgol Dewi Sant, Ysgol y Droig, St Athan Primary, Ysgol Gymraeg Sant Curig, St Helens Catholic Primary, St Helens Catholic Infants, Palmerston Primary, Cogan Primary, and Peterson Super Lady Church in Wales Primary. So there's no plans to change the operation at those sites currently. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Miles. That sounds very reassuring. I can see Mrs. King nodding. Can I invite, that, as I say, really helpful to have that reassurance that there won't be any changes and that children's safety is clearly a priority, but can I invite any non-committee members first who wish to address the committee? Councillor Haynes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Miles, for that reassurance. That reassurance has cut off much of what I was going to have to say, and I appreciate you doing it. I'd just like to remind this committee and Miles that St Athan is growing. We've had another planning of 25 units just pass through. And when you review, please look towards the 5 ways of working, because, of course, we have to look to the future, not just our current thing. We all know this, but often I think it's forgotten. And I know savings are important, but the savings that could be gained by the crossing guard are so small compared to what we could do internally. And I would suggest a time management strategy going in, but we could talk about that separately. So in brief, all I can do is thank you, Miles, and please can we continue not get rid of our crossing guards. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor. Miles, I don't know if there's anything there that you want to respond to, but please go ahead.
Chair, only to say I think it's fair that we should involve the local members in these discussions because they know the areas particularly well. So I accept fully what Councillor Haynes has said, and the 5 ways of working are the principles of sustainable development that we should employ in every decision we make. It would be good to have light control crossings outside our schools. It is an extra assistance for when the school crossing patrols aren't there. And we do have some cases where there's both. But we do pedestrian surveys and we do footfall surveys to see where people actually cross at what point. So before we make any decisions, we will do all this work in the background involving the local members and taking into account the sustainable development principles. I'm going to show you that.
Thank you, Miles. Can I ask a quick question before I bring Councillor Franks in, non-committee member, who also wants to speak on this issue? Roughly, what's the cost of a light control crossing?
That's a difficult question. It depends on the width of the road, essentially. But they can cost anything from 100,000 to $250,000. If you've got a traffic island in the middle of them and you've got separate signal heads, they're not cheap. Construction costs generally are really expensive at the minute. Zebras are cheaper, but they're not so good outside schools because if children are crossing over a long period, drivers tend to get frustrated. So light control are all preferred crossing outside schools, but they don't come cheap, unfortunately.
Thank you, Miles. I'm not surprised to hear that. Councillor Franks, you wanted to ask a question and make a comment?
Thank you very much. Obviously, it's good to hear about this reversal of the policy. But I am curious to know why this cut was proposed in the first place. It seems to have caused a great deal of unhappiness unnecessarily. I'd specifically ask, how has the £80,000 of existing savings been achieved? And if it has been achieved so quickly, why wasn't those savings identified before we considered the budget? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Franks. Miles, could you respond, please?
Certainly, Chair. First thing I would say is that I put the options to members in a report. So I didn't take this decision. The decision was taken by elected members. It was within the budget report. It was in the council report. It was in the report to this committee. The second thing is that the 83,000 was found as a result of the end of year financial process. So the closing of the financial year takes some time, and it's never around April. It's usually following that, and only due to the closure have I been able to establish that there is existing money within this service, within the road safety service generally, that we can use to support this. So two things: I didn't have the full out-term budget position when this was put forward, and it would have been before the end of 2023. That's when the budget process started. And the second thing is, it was a list of, I've said 34 lines. And members had it within their will to accept or otherwise any of those lines that I put forward, Chair.
Thank you, Miles. Councillor Franks, is that a legacy hand? If so, can I ask you to, thank you, if you can take that down. Any other?
Sorry, yes, it was a legacy hand, but I would just remind the Director, not all councillors accepted that these cuts should be made, and I think those of us who resisted it clearly made the right decision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Franks. I don't recall that particular budget proposal being challenged, but my memory may be faulty on that. So thank you for that point. Are there any other non-committee members that want to speak on this issue? If not, can I bring in Councillor Hooper in the chamber, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And firstly, I think it's really important that the petitioner has brought this petition tonight. Irrespective of the change of mind of the council, I think this shows a community that isn't prepared to accept things being done to them without their permission. So I commend you on that, Mrs. King. I think the other thing, though, Miles, you reference, I think, throughout your responses that the answers could well be infrastructure answers into the future. And I'd just like to point you to some of the points that Mrs. King made about how the crossing guard is an essential part of the community. I think this goes deeper. This is about social fabric. This is about the things that make life worthwhile. I think we need to be very careful and think that electronic control is the way to solve some of these problems. And I think services like these need to be protected at the highest possible level. This is, as Miles did say, though, they weren't his decision. They were the decision. This was a political decision that was made by the Cabinet. And I would welcome, I noticed that the Cabinet member is on the call. I'd welcome their input into this. They've been very quiet thus far. There's Mark, good. Because I think what we need to be careful about is putting officers up to respond on behalf of a Cabinet decision. But I'm really pleased this has changed. I think this is really important, and well done for the petition. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. And given the point that's been made, if committee members will just indulge me, I'm going to ask the Cabinet member if he wants to respond to that point. Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
And thank you very much. And I think it just shows this is an example of the council listening to the public in terms of a petition. And it just shows you that people have the power to raise petitions, not just to full council, but to scrutiny as well. And I think this is a really good example where we are listening. We are taking on board the views of the public. It's a pity, though, this was not raised at Scrutiny, and I do listen to Scrutiny. As you know, we made changes to the toilets, as you know. There were going to be cuts on that, and we reversed those. So things that we do listen to. So I'd just like to make that point. And I think the point's made by Councillor Hubbard that these people are very valuable assets to the community. I don't decry from that at all. They got more than just a role of helping people cross the road. They're very much the eyes and ears of the community in that area. But I also work an opportunity for Scrutiny members to identify funds and savings elsewhere in our difficult times. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Prothero, thank you for your patience. Do you want to come in on this issue?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Miles. I just wanted to ask a couple of other questions to do with the actual provision of the school crossings. I believe there are 50 primary age schools in the Vale, and I'm just curious as to what's happening with the other 40. Have we already got an alternative solution that keeps the children safe in those 40 schools? And I understand that the commitment is to review what's happening with the 10 that have the school crossing support. And I'm just curious as well to know if the requirement for the additional level of safety is something that's going to be considered in that review. Talking from my own ward and from the experience of the people in residence in my ward, the 20 mile an hour introduction was of huge benefit and was welcomed by all. Part of the ward of St Bride's had a little part of the road from the St Bride's primary school to the end of the village actually reversed back to 30. Almost every resident on that stretch of road, especially with children who walk to school on a very narrow pavement, objected, which I know you'll remember. And I know that's being reviewed again. So I do hope that they will be able to see that part of the road go back to 20 for all of the positive reasons that it was actually a pilot in the first place. Thanks very much, Miles.
Thank you, Councillor. Miles, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Prothero. Yes, there's a criteria for school crossing patrols. There's a footfall survey that we do as to how many people cross at a certain time. And then we look at other provision. So is it a 20 mile an hour outside the school? Is it a 20 mile an hour that has speed controls, speed humps and chicanes alike? Is it a crossing point? So we have an assessment process we use. And when we've not replaced someone from a previous school, we've gone through that process. So we're not looking at assessing other schools unless they've got a safety issue. We're not saying never, because if there is a safety issue for any specific school, we'll look at it as we would any other section of highway, and it would take priority. But we're only looking at this particular set of schools because that's where we got the school crossing patrols. The 20 mile an hour review is ongoing. The Welsh Government is in its listening phase, as they term it, and we will be taking comments up until July as to changes from either 30 to 20 or the other way around. We've already got the route that you mentioned, Councillor Prothero, because it was raised very early with us, and we've got a number of other routes as well that we'll be looking at as part of this process. And it'll be factored into Welsh Government's new guidance on 20 mile an hour routes, which is due to come out at the end of July. So there may well be some changes as a result of the previously default 20 mile an hours or those routes remaining at 30, but it'll take a good few months for us to do those after we get Welsh Government's guidance at the end of July.
Thank you, Miles. Councillor Ernest, did you want to come in on this? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've looked very carefully at this report, and I congratulate Mrs. King on the address she's made, and also my colleague, Councillor Steve, who has very succinctly put forward the case. I think the real issue is, if we look at our report, in paragraph 2.9, neighbourhood services and transport is where most of the council's frontline services lie. And yet it was a decision of the Cabinet to cut back in neighbourhood services, which meant cutting back on not only school crossing patrols, but potholes, on roads maintenance, on paved maintenance, a whole range of things, because as Miles Punter said, we had to save around £2 million. So I can understand some members of the committee sort of not having a lot to say about it. But the reality is, Chairman, that the cuts were made, Cabinet agreed them. Some of us in Scrutiny disagreed with those arguments, but we lost the case. But we go down gracefully, and we still hold to our view that if we can provide crossing patrols, they are obviously best for the school. If we can't provide them, then the alternative is to ensure that there are safe options, maybe controlled crossings, or maybe something else, reducing speed limits around the schools, which I think we all support. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think, you know, from my perspective as chair, I would just remind committee that when proposals come in the form of budget reports, we do have the opportunity to call in any specific issues that are relevant to this committee, and that's part of what we're here to do in terms of our scrutiny functions. So we'll have that opportunity, I'm sure, going forward as financial proposals begin to be developed towards the end of the financial year. I don't see anyone else that wants to speak, but I just want to let committee know that Councillor Champion, who's a member of this committee, has not been able to join us this evening, but he did want to ask a question. So I'm going to ask that on his behalf. Miles, Councillor Champion wanted to know whether or not any form of sponsorship had been considered in relation to picking up the funding costs or meeting the funding costs for the school crossing patrols.
No, Chair, not this particular service. We do welcome sponsorship from other service areas, but we hadn't gone down that route for this service. I think if we were looking to reduce the staff numbers, then we would be seriously looking at other forms of funding. So I think now is the time perhaps to have a look at whether there's other opportunities for funding for these services. It's not something that we've looked at as yet, but I would welcome any opportunity to reduce this financial burden and retain the service. So it's a good point. We've not done it in this service, but I'm quite happy to do so.
Thank you, Miles. I don't see any other hands, so I don't think anybody else wants to come in on this issue. So, Mrs. King, thank you very much for giving us your time this evening and for bringing this really important issue before committee. I hope you are reassured by the answers that officers have given you, but notwithstanding, nevertheless, given the level of public interest there is in this issue, I am going to propose a recommendation to Cabinet, and that recommendation is that this committee supports the decision that's been outlined tonight, that no steps are taken to remove current school crossing patrols until a review has been carried out as appropriate to ensure child safety. Can I have a seconder for that recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. I see lots of hands going at Councillor Prothero, Councillor Norman. Thank you. So that recommendation will be fed back to Cabinet from this committee. Thank you again, Mrs. King. You're very welcome to stay for the remainder of the committee meeting if you'd like to do that. But equally, if you want to leave to enjoy the rest of your evening, please do feel free to do that. And obviously the same to yourself, Miles. I don't know if you're staying for any other agenda items, but feel free to leave. And thank you for your time. So now, committee, we go back to agenda item 4. This is a reference from Cabinet regarding the development of the corporate plan 25 to 2030, panel performance assessment and the annual performance calendar 2024-25. This is before us for our consideration this evening, with any views being referred back to Cabinet. Marcus Goldsworthy, the Director for Place, is joining us, and committee members who I'm sure have read the report will note that it's quite a long report. So I believe, Marcus, you're going to take us through it section by section so that we can ask questions as we go. Over to you. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, well, I've done a with Miles's help, I've done a short presentation which hopefully will take us through it so that you don't have to listen to my voice droning on for too long on the report. So I think the presentation is up. It is, yes. So really quickly, the report presents the annual performance calendar for the Council for 24-25. It outlines the activities that will be subject to review by members over the year. There are two added aspects this year, which are the development of the new corporate plan for 25 to 2030 and the arrangements for undertaking a panel performance assessment. Helpfully, the report can be broken down into 4 sections, and after each section, I'll pause to see if there are any questions from anyone in the Scrutiny Committee. So the 4 sections are corporate plan development, panel performance and assessment, learning from 22-23 annual safe assessment, proposals for the 23-24 assessment, and the annual performance calendar itself. The first section is around the corporate plan development, and this is for the new corporate plan for 25 to 30, and this is paragraphs 2.2 to 2.9 of the report for those who have the report in front of them. It is proposed that the Council's visions and values will remain the same as these still provide a strong foundation for the development of the new plan. Work has commenced to develop new well-being objectives, which will consider a range of factors, including the results of the recent resident survey, Let's Talk, key data about the Vale of Glamorgan, regulatory recommendations, outcomes from the most recent annual self-assessment, and the Public Service Board's wellbeing plan and objectives. Oops, excuse me, gone too far. Right? Oops, it's a bit sensitive. I'll try and jump forward without there. Apologies. Engagement around this to develop the draft wellbeing objectives. A structured approach to engagement is being undertaken, initially informed by the findings of the Vale of Glamorgan's PSB wellbeing assessment, the results, as I've said, of the Let's Talk survey, and qualitative feedback gained through our placemaking work. The initial engagement focus has been on the internal development and consideration of a set of draft objectives. And engagement has been undertaken with Cabinet members, chief officers and the strategic leadership team of the Council on the themes and the areas of focus for the organisation, which has allowed an initial draft wording of the wellbeing objectives to be developed. Following this internal engagement work, focus will now be placed on external engagement on the draft wellbeing objectives that we have prepared. This will include engagement with elected members through the Members Champion Network, the PSB again, the Equalities Consultative Forum, the 50+ Forum, building on engagement work undertaken through Age Friendly Vale, the Vale of Glamorgan Youth Council, and external engagement activities will include follow-up engagement linked to Let's Talk, including partnership work with Vale Food Bank and attendance at a number of public events, including National Play Day and Children and Young People's Rights Festival. The overall aims. The aim for the new plan is to be more outcome focused, so that it is clearer that what we are seeking to achieve, and this can be measured and evidenced. The new plan is being developed alongside the budget and medium-term financial plan. And paragraph 2.8 of the report provides the indicative timetable for the development of the new plan, and the panel performance assessment is factored into the development of the plan over the autumn, with the plan being amended or possibly amended as a consequence of this process. And I will come on to the panel performance assessment next. Committee is asked to consider and agree this approach and the indicative timetable shown. So I'll pause there to see if there are any questions around the corporate plan development.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Any questions or comments from anyone? Councillor Hooper, please.
Thank you, Miles, and yes, thank you, Marcus. Sorry. Yeah, the point that came up at Governance and Order when we talked at Corporate Performance last night on the corporate plan related to, is there an opportunity to not think of things in terms of a 5-year corporate plan? And I think that was quite an interesting debate that we had. So I'm just reintroducing it here. And for the purpose of the fact you take the last 5 years, we've had COVID, we've had a war in Europe, and we've had a cost of living crisis we've not seen before. These are things that have had huge impacts on our plan, and it's about trying to create something. I'd be interested from your perspective that is agile enough to be able to move with everything that happens, because I think with the best will in the world and us all wanting to see a future that's rosier than it is now, I think the chances are we're likely to see more pressures going forward. I just welcome you. It was a really good debate last night. I'd be interested in your perspective.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus. Would you like to respond to that, please?
Yeah, I think obviously there is a set of guidelines which we work to in terms of the preparation of the corporate plan, and that is fairly rigid. But in saying that, I think we would try to draft the plan in such a way as that it does reflect one flexibility, so that it can be flexed to amend to look into the future. I don't think, and we all know this because you've raised some very good points there around things we never thought would happen in the life of the previous plan. I suppose you could probably put, mind you know, it was drafted when Brexit was in place, so Brexit was there, but certainly in the 5 year previous to that, you probably could have added Brexit into that. I think the plan has stood up pretty well to the challenges that, you know, you've highlighted there. We could add cost of living, which has come from the inflationary effects of Brexit as well, or other inflationary effects as well, including COVID, to it. And the plan has stood up to that in terms of what the challenges that are identified in the plan and what we've tried to do. But I think we clearly, as an organisation, as a business, we have to have a core plan to work to. And 5 years, I think, is recognised as the correct period. But I think really the best we can do is make sure that the plan is flexible enough to take account of as many issues as we possibly can.
Thank you, Marcus. I guess the test will be, let's see what happens in the next 5 years, and let's see if this plan equally stands up to that test of time and the circumstances that many of which will no doubt be unforeseen that will come our way. I don't see any other hands in terms of questions on that section. So would you like to move on to the next part of your presentation, please, Marcus? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. So the next part is a new part again, which is about panel performance assessment. And this is explained in paragraph 2.10. It explains the requirement that the Council has to undertake a new panel performance assessment, which it must do once during every electoral cycle. The purpose of the PPA is to provide independent external challenge and to help the Council in its improvement journey. The PPAs are being administered via the Welsh Local Government Association, who will appoint the panel and facilitate the assessment. Paragraph 2.12 details the makeup of the panel, and councils have the opportunity to agree the panel membership to ensure its suitability. We can also appoint additional members should we see fit. The Council must submit a scoping document to the WLGA to provide an overview of the Council and the outline of its vision, of our vision and wellbeing objectives. Work has commenced on the scoping document, which will be informed by the findings of the Council's latest annual self-assessment and any recent external assessments of the Council. It's proposed to use the assessment as an opportunity, the PPA assessment, as an opportunity to sense check our emerging improvement plans as part of the development of the new corporate plan. And committee is asked to consider and approve the proposed scope of the Council's panel performance assessment and the timetable that's detailed in section 2.19 of the report. So I'll pause there just in case anyone's got any questions.
Thank you, Marcus. I'll ask a question if I may. So I note that the PPA, the panel performance assessment, must take place between May 22 and May 2027. So interested to know why it's considered to be something that's helpful for us to take part in at this stage.
I think in terms of timing, obviously we are moving forward to the development of a new corporate plan. I think we as a senior leadership team think it will be very valuable to us to actually go through this process now in advance of actually finalising that new plan. And I think it's just a case of timing, really. We will be one of the first councils to go through it. But I think given that we are right at the start of renewing the corporate plan. It seems like the right time to do it so that we can build any advice and any external assessments that come back to us into the future of that plan. I mean, strengthening that plan, hopefully, as Councillor Hooper's raised that issue, hopefully that will provide some way of strengthening the plan looking to the future.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Councillor Ernest, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question is fairly simple. I'm just wondering where the role of, if you like, backbench members of the council comes into this assessment. We talk about senior leadership team, cabinet, WLGA and so on, but not much reference to those who, with respect, I call ordinary members of the council, who beaver away day to day, but also do their best to ensure that the council operates in an efficient and competent manner. Maybe Marcus could answer that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Marcus, are you able to respond to that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The actual panel performance assessment timetable is included at section 2.19. There is a role for scrutiny within that, and you can see that in that process. I'm just quickly looking through it myself just to refresh my memory of what it actually says. And there will be a role for.
Yes, I do have it in front of me actually, but
sorry, Councillor Ernest, just one moment. If we just let Marcus finish what he's saying, thank you.
There will be a role for both Governance and Audit Committee and full council in the actual process itself, rather than individual council members. I think the role is intended that scrutiny, the separate scrutinies, and actually full council in adopting the agreement will have a role. Sorry, assessment will have their role at that point.
Thank you, Marcus. Councillor Ernest, did you want to come back in on that, Councillor Ernest?
No. I'm happy to have made the point. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And again, just to remind committee, as I've done already, that scrutiny committees are able to call issues in if they want to consider them in any detail, and they're not already part of the forward work programme. Any other questions or comments on that section of the report? No? Then we'll move on to the next section, please, Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and the next section is around learning from the 22-23 annual self-assessment and the proposed approach for 23-24. Paragraph 2.20 details the learning that we have received from those the previous year's self-assessment and how we propose to deal with it in 23-24. The review findings are detailed in paragraphs 2.21 under the headings. I won't read through all those headings, you can see them there for yourselves. Elected members will be supported in their role in the peer challenge process through the annual self-assessment. And there is an internal peer challenge guidance note, which is aimed at helping members through that process. And a paragraph 2.27 and Appendix A, the report outlines how elected members will be involved in key activities, including the Council's annual self-assessment. Committee is asked to consider the review findings from last year's annual self-assessment approach and approve the proposed changes to the 23-24 self-assessment, including the indicative timetable. This will be the end of the process for consulting on the self-assessment report, which has been informed previously by a wide range of engagement and consultation activity which has been underway over the past year. So I'll pause there again just for any questions.
Thank you, Marcus. Councillor Hooper, did you want to come in on that?
Thanks, Marcus. Got your name right this time. The only point I want to make, and I don't know how you resolve this, but when we had the self-assessment that was issued last time, it was not too long afterwards we had the Let's Talk survey results, and there was a disconnect between the two. And I'm not trying to make a point that's tricky, trying to create a tricky point here, but we need to make sure that how we assess ourselves bears a relation to how people also see us from outside, and how these two documents they will never match, but how they better talk to each other. Because otherwise, there's a danger that the self-assessment just looks like a happy clappy exercise and something that's not of use. Now, I know we've got to do it because the law says we have to, but we also should make sure that this is something that's a real benefit. Thanks.
Marcus, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think we do recognise that, if you like, self-assessment is by its very nature can be criticised for perhaps not being as robust as people would like. I think you've probably heard this many times before. What people are writing in under the survey are quite different to what we are when we're going through our assessment. We are assessing against our own targets, and those may not be what people think are the right things to be progressing. So, but I think the point is that we are at a point in the cycle now where we're going to give ourselves the chance to align those documents. So you made the point earlier, didn't you, about the corporate plan and how up to date was that, if you like. And I think some of the information we're now starting to gather will mean that a lot of these mechanisms, like the directed self-assessment, the new peer challenge we're talking about, we've got a peer challenge in here, but there's also the external peer challenge. Those things are all starting to come together and will allow us to, I think, get a more moderated view through the process. So you're quite right, they'll never align. They are, to all intents and purposes, looking at slightly different things. But I think we will get to a point in this process now where they will begin to align a little bit more than they have in the past, perhaps.
Thank you very much. And I don't see hands from anyone else wanting to come in on this section of the report. So over to you, Marcus, for the final section. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. You'd be grateful to hear this is the last bit, and there's not too long. So paragraph 2.3 outlines the proposed annual performance calendar and its related activities, and is our key means of meeting our legal duties under the Local Government and Elections Wales Act. The annual performance calendar for 24-25 is shown at Appendix A of the report for this year, and also reflects the key milestones in developing the new corporate plan and undertaking the panel performance assessment. So just building on what I've said back when answering your question, Councillor Hooper. That's paragraphs 2.32 and 2.33. The report details the important role elected members have in assessing whether the council is achieving its wellbeing objectives, delivering value for money and improving the wellbeing of the Vale of Glamorgan residents. And there is a wish for the timetable and its associated activities to provide more opportunities for elected members to be involved. There have been a number of member workshops throughout the year aligned to the annual performance calendar, and the output of these workshops has been used by officers to strengthen our self-reflection approaches aligned to the annual performance calendar of activities. The committee is asked to consider and agree the annual performance calendar for 24-25 and the proposed approach to engaging with members in the year to shape the performance calendar activities and support their scrutiny role. Thank you all.
Thank you, Marcus. If I may, I'd like to ask a question about the timetable for producing and reporting the annual self-assessment for 23-24. So I can see in the report it says that engagement on self-assessment findings, including staff, public and other key stakeholders, will be happening in August. And I suppose my concern about that is that's a month when lots of members of staff are often taking leave and members of the public are also potentially likely to be away or busy with carer responsibilities. So I am concerned about that timetable and the potential impact that might have. So my question is how will we ensure that that engagement is meaningful given the challenges around the summer months?
Thank you, Chair. That is a question which is, I think, come back. Is it one scrutiny was already done, Miles? Yeah, exactly the same question actually came back through Homes and Cells. So I know Miles, who did that meeting, took it back to our performance colleagues. I think that we need to reflect it is the end of, for the 24 plan, it is the end of the process. So we have a year of consultation that's already happened. It's been the self-assessment report has been informed by a wide range of engagement and consultation activity over the last year. Re-engaging on the wellbeing objectives has happened as well with the PSB. I understand we will be doing more stakeholder events with a wide reach in July and attending a host of events over the summer to do some more, with the formal consultation on the actual plan taking place in the autumn. So it's not the last chance to make comments. There will be more comments, and I think these are comments Tom has sent me, by the way, just to reflect. So I'm not making this up on the hoof, but I think Tom, who is the Director for Corporate Services, has reflected how it is good to see members making connections with the survey as well, and good to see how members are interested in what's coming back from the consultation process and ensuring that is included in the assessment overall. So if it's any, there will be further chance to comment on it, and I think the Corporate Director has made it very clear that he intends there to be further consultation in the autumn.
Thank you very much. Councillor Prothero, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Marcus. My request is really an operational request, and it's to do with engagement and insight, which obviously is critical to the formation of this corporate plan, and to help us identify and design what our service users need. I understand we use our surveys, and surveys are great, but they're quite binary. We ask questions and some people will respond, and that is observational. But I'd like to see how we can do more in terms of how we prove and show that we are listening and that we put our service users at the heart of what we do. And I'd wonder if within the additional engagement and insight that I know you're going to be doing, can we have this fed back to us as a committee so we can see exactly what's happening and what we're doing with the information and the insight that we're gleaning? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marcus. Is that something that's possible?
I can certainly ask and pass those comments on to Tom. It's not specifically my director, as you know, but I will certainly pass those comments on to Tom.
Thank you. And I think Councillor Prothero, when we've finished our discussion and debate about the report, we can probably formulate a recommendation that goes back to Cabinet, which will help with that request. Councillor Ernest, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Unusually, I'd like to support your comments on the month of August, particularly just reading it again. I mean, engagement, including staff, public and other key holders, including trade unions and businesses. Surely those 4 weeks are four of the most important weeks of the year for people taking annual leave. And I suspect that the response you will get during that period would be unusually low, which is regrettable because in the formation of the new plan, we want to have the observations of all concerned. So I think on this side of the table, if I can put it that way, we would be supportive of you in seeking that August date may be either realigned in some way or some other measures taken to ensure that the calendar gives adequate opportunity for the consultees I mentioned a second or two ago to effectively give us feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ernest. I hope it's not too unusual that we agree on matters on a cross-party basis in this committee, because clearly that's one of the key functions of scrutiny, that we put those issues aside and focus on those matters that we feel are important to residents. And Marcus, I think you've already given us some reassurance on that issue. Was there anything else that you wanted to add?
I will certainly add a reference to Councillor Ernest's comments when I feed back to the Director around the consultation process.
Thank you, I'm grateful.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wanting to speak on this issue? If not, I'll just sum up. And I think potentially we've got two recommendations from what I think has been a really helpful discussion. The first is to ensure that the self-assessment process takes account as far as possible, and let me reword it to make sure I'm clear. Ensure the self-assessment process is aligned as far as possible with the views being expressed through residents' survey. So that's the first recommendation to go from committee. Can I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. And the second recommendation relates to the discussion that we've just had in terms of the timetable for producing and reporting the annual self-assessment. The recommendation being that members' concerns about the potential risks associated with the timetable for engagement are considered and a flexible approach is taken, with timetables being extended where possible to ensure engagement is meaningful and representative. And again, if committee is happy with that recommendation, could I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Norman, are you coming in to second that? Yes, I see your hand. Thank you very much, Councillor Norman. So Marcus, thank you very much for taking us through that report, and thank you very much for your time. I don't know if you're staying for the next agenda item. You're very welcome to remain with us. So committee, we move on now to agenda item 6. This is the Project Zero update report. Committee will, I'm sure, recall that we last received a report in January, and the report is before us this evening so that we can consider the progress being made and again refer any comments back to Cabinet for consideration alongside those from Corporate Performance and Resources Committee, who are also due to consider the report. We're joined tonight by Susanna McWilliam, the Programme Manager for Project Zero Climate Change. And again, this is quite a long report. So Susanna, I think you're going to take us through it in sections to allow committee members to ask questions as appropriate. Thank you, Susanna. Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. The committee will be aware of the background of Project Zero and the declaration of the climate emergency and the nature emergency in 2019 and 2021. This report shows the updates from Project Zero within a very time-defined period. So it's October 23 to March 24. It's a large and it's a wide-ranging report that goes across work in all directorates. It pulls out the notable progress across 18 of the key challenges within our Climate Change Challenge Plan, and there are 80 steps that sit underneath that. A year or so ago, couple of different committees asked us to give more detail, and so this is perhaps the third report now where we've pulled out into a RAG rating in the appendix the detail, so hopefully it's going to be more familiar this time around. And again, just to remind everyone that it's over a 6-month period. So I'll take it in 5 different sections with a Q&A in between, and Marcus is here as well to support with any particular questions that might come through that would sit within his area. I'll take you through a few of the progress reports highlights to start with. So first off, we did an engagement event back in October, which we co-designed with the Youth Vale Forum. We felt it was really important to get the perspective of young people on the climate emergency. So they came up with the ideas and helped us to co-design that event. We had secondary school pupils there from 7 different secondary schools on the themes of transport and waste, again, chosen by young people themselves. We had great representation from Transport for Wales, RAP. We also had Welsh Government, and we had a number of elected members at the event too, and representatives from the various directorates. That's been quite a long-term project, so we've gone back a number of times to the Youth Council, and we've made a commitment to a year-long engagement piece with them to follow through on the things that we said would happen and give them updates on a regular basis. We had some new climate change modules that were launched on IDEV during this period, 4 different modules, and there's a bit of communication work done around promoting uptake of those. We've got an important leadership role when it comes to our climate change work, so I wanted to draw your attention to some work that our colleagues in the estates team have been doing. They accessed some funding from the Assets Collaboration Programme Wales, and have used that funding to work with 3 different community centres across the Vale. That work was done in the last financial year, and all 3 sites benefited from new solar PV arrays and battery storage. So that battery storage enables them to make use of the energy that's been stored from the panels, but also to feed back into the grid. They've had new insulation on the heating pipe work, smarter boiler controls, so a bit like you might have Nest in your own home, so that the heating and the systems can be controlled by an app. They've also had new LED light fittings fitted. So perhaps by the next report, there'll be some evidence around change. But the initial feedback from all 3 community centres has been incredibly positive. There's quite a bit in there on nature and the environment. Lots happening in our country parks through the Vale Local Nature Partnership, Restore the Thaw, and there's been extensive tree planting that's been reported here. There's also been biodiversity grants to community groups, works in community orchards, engagement events and practical sessions with local communities leading to improved habitats and new skills for volunteers. There's so much happening in the nature and green space arena. It's hard to do it justice in this report. There's been a rollout of waste services to support the new workplace recycling regulations. That's been a huge piece of work across all of Wales, and our waste team have worked. You'll probably notice new bins in the buildings that you've been in. Also, there's been some work to support schools and to do a wider rollout. We've been talking about a new reuse shop for quite some time, and it's brilliant in this period. That's up and running now. The Enfys Foundation shop has opened at the Atlantic Trading Estate, so if people haven't had a chance to go and visit that, that's been very successful, and again, volunteering opportunities to work there. In terms of water leaks, there is a link between our water use and our carbon emissions, so that's one of the elements that we report on every year. When the energy team and I running weekly reports to identify water leaks right across the estate, and that's starting to become quite effective. There are obviously financial savings to be made there, as well as carbon savings. When it comes to some of the work on energy, as well as the school buildings programme, there's information in the report on what's been happening there. So it includes installation of air source heat pumps. We've had some work done in the Alps garage where LED lighting's been introduced. So that's seen a reduction in energy use by 70%. And quite a lot of the activities that I've just pulled out as headlines will help us to reduce our carbon emissions. So I'll take a stop there through those headlines if anyone's got any questions.
Thank you very much, Susanna. Any questions from anyone, please, in relation to that section of the report? I have a question, if I may. You referenced the draft tree strategy, Susanna, and we had a really good discussion about that when it came before committee some months ago. And I note the consultation ended in March in terms of the tree strategy. So it would be really helpful to know what the response has been to that and when it will be finalised so it can begin to be operationalised. I don't know who wants to take that. Miles, you're going to take it. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, happy to take that. Really, really good responses. Lots of people really engaged positively as well. Good comments. So I have the first draft on my desk. But we're still missing consultation responses on 2 large submissions we had from local groups, and that's what we're working on next. So I should have it finalised in draft for Councillor Wilson to consider within the next 10 days. And it's fair to say, I know Councillor Wilson's on the call. He is putting quite a bit of pressure on me to get it through because it's been quite some time in its development. So really good responses. I think what's important, and you alluded to this previously as did Councillor Prothero, is to recognise that the people that have responded have taken a good deal of time in putting their constructive comments together. So it's important that we reflect that in our response and we adjust the report if we think that's right to do so, and we explain if we don't think it's right to do so. Because one of the things that came out of the Let's Talk survey was that the public don't think we're listening to them properly. So this is a good opportunity for us to put that right. And because it's got such useful comments behind it, I intend to try and do that in this report.
Thank you, Miles. And presumably we're not waiting for that tree strategy to be finalised before actually beginning to implement some of the proposals within it. I know work is happening in this area.
No, Chair. The principles of the report and the fact that we're looking to increase the tree canopy, urban tree canopy, is embedded. So most of the things that are in there we're working to. We've also had increases in the capital programme, both for planting and for maintenance. So we're cracking on with that programme. So it's not holding us up, but it would be better to have it in place, because there's lots of involvement for volunteer groups or whatever that's picked up in the document that we can actually formalise better when it's in place.
We look forward to seeing the final version. I can see the Cabinet member wants to come in, but if I may, I'm going to bring in committee members first, because there may be other issues as well, Councillor Wilson, that you then want to respond to. So, Councillor Penn, please. I think we've lost you, Councillor Penn. So I'm just going to give you a few moments to you're back with us. Do you want to try again?
Can you hear me, Chair?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Apologies. I pressed the button when it was yellow and it disappeared me. Thank you. Just a couple of points on the Restore the Thaw project. We had NRW and Do Cymru in recently. Does the council work in that area, improving the water qualities of the thaw as well as other habitats? Because if you don't work on the water quality, then that's a big part of that habitat. And as Chair's just mentioned, the questions on the tree strategy. Would the council be acceptable to crowdfunding to replace trees in town centres if that was a funding source that was available? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So, questions on two different issues: Restore the Thaw and crowdfunding for trees. I don't know who wants to take those. Marcus, you're going to take them.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the first one, and then possibly we can do a joint effort on the second one. The Restore the Thaw project obviously intrinsically does include the thaw itself in it. It is aimed at the habitat which is in the actual Thaw Valley itself, right, as well as the river, the stream or river, whatever you want to call it, river by the time it gets to the bottom, obviously. The water quality will be an issue, and the planting and the restoration of the habitat alongside that is a big key process in actually restoring the water quality. And it's important to note that the grant that we're working to actually was given to us by Natural Resources Wales, so it is a fundamental of part of what their aims and objectives as well. So the answer is yes, and it's been a really successful project so far, and is achieving great results with tree planting on a wider scale. So yes.
Great, thank you very much. And then crowdfunding for trees, Miles.
Chair, on the second point, we'll take anyone's money, to be quite frank. No, and to be serious, yes. One of the issues I think we'll find with the strategy is that the street trees in Penarth, which are extremely highly valued, some of them have grown beyond their useful life, and they're now encroaching seriously on footways. You've got huge hills either side of them because we're trying to cover the roots over. In order to take those trees out and replant costs tens of thousands of pounds in some cases. So the only way we can do that really is by assistance from some other means. So yes, certainly we would like to work with either the people living in that street or people who generally have got a love for trees to try and get some more money in to address those issues, because the only other option for us is to take them out, and we don't want to do that either. So we're living with them at the minute, and they're causing some difficulties. But ideally, we'd like to replace them over a scheduled period with a more suitable species, which will be in essentially a box that contains the roots, so that it cannot damage some of the infrastructure. Because when they were put in, things like fibre and things like that, and the now runs through the footway was not conceived. So we've got to be a lot more careful about what we put into the highways now. So we'd have to put them in some sort of container. They have to be the right type of species, so they don't go oversize. But yeah, we would look at all sorts of funding, and crowdfunding is one option we're happy to consider.
Thank you, Miles. Did you want to come back in on that, Councillor Penn?
It was only great that the obviously the Thor runs through the Thor Valley, and great that the water quality is taken into account as well. I'd be a bit dismayed if it wasn't. It is still a migratory river for sea trout and things like that. So the better the water quality, the better the chances of those species continuing. The other thing was the one tree in the Penarth Town Centre was actually quite a small one when it was taken out. I can't remember why, but that wasn't a big mature horse chestnut or ones that normal ones in Penarth. So that might be a bit easier to replace. That's the one I was specifically thinking about, is the town centre one at the moment, because there's kind of a gap, and it's a bit sad that there's a gap in the town centre. But thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. My recollection of the tree strategy is that it very much focuses on the right tree in the right place, and that if we lose a tree in one area, it doesn't necessarily mean that tree will be replaced again in that area for various reasons, that the focus may well be on areas where there are less trees, which, again, if my memory of the tree strategy serves me right, is actually surprisingly in the rural Vale, where there's a more significant tree loss. So a tree lost in one area will not necessarily be directly replaced, but you've heard Miles say that the tree strategy makes it clear, very keen to engage with local residents around trees in their area. So that opportunity and that invitation is very much live. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Drake, please.
Hello. This is just a query about the tree strategy. I just wanted to know if you're monitoring other tree diseases which seem to be on the increase at the moment, mostly in England, but we've all heard about ash dieback and Dutch elm disease. But there's another one now called acute oak decline and sweet chestnut blight. There's a lot of other ones, and I was just wondering whether you're actually monitoring these just to keep them under control.
I don't know who's taking that. We've got a double act here tonight.
It's a bit of a double act here. I mean, yeah, they're not a particularly good or funny double act, but yes is the answer. We do have, obviously, we've got an ecologist who works for the council who does his best to keep abreast of what the threats are to our sort of species that populate the Vale. We've also got an arboriculturist now in Miles's area who will, I'm sure, also be keeping themselves well abreast of any concerns around diseases that are coming forward. Certainly, the ecologist has a really good route into what are possible threats in the future in terms of invasive sort of diseases and insect-borne diseases for trees, and is aware of quite a few. It is quite worrying when you speak to him about what's out there and what could come. And of course, climate change is one of the big issues around this, because quite a few of these diseases are carried by insects, and they're carried by insects we haven't necessarily normally seen in the Vale, and we're starting to see because of climate change, essentially, and the change in temperatures. But yes, we do have a pretty good handle on what's there, and there are really strong networks with the councils, with the ecologists, and with arboriculturists around what is out there and what could be a possible threat.
Yeah, it is worrying at the moment, isn't it, when you see these things coming on board?
Yeah, thank you, Marcus, and I hope that's reassuring, Councillor Drake, in terms of steps the council is taking. And again, just to remind people that there is, I believe, a link on the council website where members of the public are able to get in touch if they have concerns about any of the trees in their areas. Councillor Prothero, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is in connection with the challenge 13 to 18, Make a Difference Now, which is ironic, and focusing on our procurement issue. As we know, the majority of our carbon emissions are to be found in our supply chain. And I understand from our review here of our procurement strategy that we haven't made very much progress in cutting our carbon emissions from our supply chain due to capacity issues. I understand from this review that there are plans to address this. Can you tell me what the plans are, please? Thank you.
Susanna, are you going to take that one?
I'm happy to take that one unless either of my colleagues would.
I think Marcus is going to jump in.
Perfect. Thank you, Marcus.
I will jump in really quickly. It's not specifically an area that Miles or I deal with in terms of the overall procurement role, although we have been involved in several meetings recently around the Council's Joint Procurement Service known as ARDL, which we are jointly working with Cardiff and Monmouthshire on. And we have received some of the presentations on some of the work they are putting in place to actually improve this. I think it's fair to say that in shifting from our previous procurement system in the council, which was, I think it's fair to say, pretty understaffed. It was a pretty it was a process with very few people working in it. We've joined forces with Cardiff and Monmouth to try and make the system more robust. It's taken some time for that to bed in, and I know the head of finance would be the first to say that it's taken longer than he would have liked to bed in. But as part of that process, we are expecting to see real improvements in our sort of carbon, decreasing carbon across the procurement process. It's probably worth noting there is some, and I'm sure Councillor Prothero knows this, there is some really important legislation which is being enacted in October around procurement, which makes this even more important for us, and we are receiving briefings about that all the time. So I'm probably not the right person to go into it in great depth, and probably Miles isn't either, but it's worth saying we do know somebody who is, and we're quite happy to pass that back to him as well.
Thank you. Did you want to come back in on that, Councillor Prothero?
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I appreciate that that we are working with ARDL on the future for procurement in the Vale. What I wanted to just sort of like point out and make this clear, though ARDL will help with tendering, the responsibility of putting a specification together and commissioning what it is that we need as an authority to purchase is going to have to sit with us and with the service areas, I would imagine. And that bit of work has to be done internally. It's about what we buy, designing waste out of what it is that we buy, sometimes deciding whether we need to buy it at all. And there needs to be a firm strategy which is internal to our organisation to be able to do that. And I really hope that we are thinking on those lines as well, rather than just what is it that ARDL can do for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to assume that those are issues that will be fed back rather than issues you want to comment on.
I think to be fair, they are issues we have discussed. It's not. I think with the reference to ARDL, I think it's fair to say the work that's gone into procurement has taken. That is what has knocked back, I think, some of the work we'd have liked to have done from an internal procurement standpoint in terms of carbon reduction. It's going on, and it is going on across departments. And when we put contracts ready, work through contracts and procurement and tenders, it's a key part of what we're doing. We're working with WLGA on standard practice for some of that as well. So it is happening. I think it probably just hasn't happened as quickly as we would have liked. It's fair to say.
Thank you, Marcus. I'm conscious we're having a really long discussion, and this is just one section of the report that you've taken us through so far, Susanna. I'm going to bring the Cabinet member in. Thank you for your patience, Councillor Wilson, and then we'll go back to Susanna.
And thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak. Yeah, just a few observations there. I mean, Susanna's made some really good points about what we're doing as a council in terms of Project Zero work. And obviously, one of the areas that she did identify, and I like people to use as much as possible, is when you do go down to the facility in the Atlantic Trading Estate to get rid of some of your things that you want to get rid of there that you can't obviously get rid of locally, then you pop into the shop. The only thing I would say is the shop is not open on Monday, but every other day of the week, it's a superb place to go and to visit. And not only you can buy things, but you also can give away things there as well. So I urge everyone to go there if you haven't done so already. And the other thing also Suzanne mentioned, which is obviously still very much work in progress, although we as a council are doing our best here, given limited resources in this area, is commercial recycling. And as you know, there's now responsibility on commercial organisations to separate recycling along with residential people, and obviously residential people. And also, that's really good initiative. And I like companies, if they got any concerns or any issues, like to do a bit more, or even transfer the service over to us. You know, we're very accommodating, and of course, we obviously would like the business as well. And finally, of course, I mean, in terms of procurement, I totally agree. We should try and procure as things locally as possible in order to reduce the impact of carbon, but also got to bear in mind there are procurement rules out there which are fairly rigid, and we've got to go through, you know, in many cases, dedicated websites such as Sale to Wales. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll move on, Susanna. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to take us briefly through the top lines of the resources section. So much of Project Zero is delivered within existing staffing levels, and with quite a broad range of budgets. So we've got the annual capital funds, we've got the Project Zero reserves, we have Salix funding, we've got some Welsh Government budgets, for example, on schools, buildings, work, transport, and the council housing building programme. We've got some SPF funds that have been used for Project Zero related projects. We've also, I mentioned earlier, the Welsh Government Assets Collaboration Programme. So it's just to raise attention of the fact that actually a lot of this work is happening with a very broad range of budgets across the board. There's an application process for Project Zero reserves that's been in place now for over a year, as well as opening opportunities to come from that particular budget itself. We've also used the application process to actually signpost to other funding sources. So there are occasions when the Project Zero board meets, there's quite a kind of strict allocation of funding, and we tend to look at how much those projects will help us to reach net zero by 2030. And there's some projects that are incredibly exciting, great projects, particularly working with the community. But we sometimes will try and find a signpost to alternative sources of funding where they're more appropriate. So we've seen SPF funding allocated recently for a walking bus in the Pencoitra School cluster that's started since this report was done. That's been incredibly successful. So again, just raising awareness of the fact that the Project Zero Reserves process has helped to unlock funding in other areas as well. Some of the funding that we've given from the Project Zero reserves has helped to part fund other projects. So we've benefited as a council substantially from putting in some match funding for certain projects like the air source heat pump in one of our schools. So in this section, I won't go into it in great detail because of time, but you can see there a list of the projects that have been put in place during 23-24, such as some LED lighting schemes in schools and workshops. You can also see in that section of the report some of the up-and-coming projects for 24-25 that will be looking at energy reduction measures and renewable energy installations working across the council. So I leave it there to allow time for questions.
Thank you, Susanna. Councillor Hooper, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Susanna. Just a brief thought, and this links the corporate plan work that was done first. We're obviously encroaching on 2030 at some pace, which fits quite a lot of these things. And I think when you start to look at the budgets that are applied to this, they seem wholly inadequate for the issue at hand. And I just want to make the point, I'd be interested in your views. I'd be interested also in Councillor Wilson's views on this as well, and how hard we're pushing for these budgets to be dramatically increased into this next planning phase, because it's just not good enough, not quick enough, not fast enough, and that is no way a reflection of the work that's being put in. So please don't take it at that. But this is something I and I'm sure most other people here feel hugely strongly about, and I think it just needs to be upweighted and linking two things that are on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. And if I can just add a question to that. I mean, the report outlines some really great initiatives that have been undertaken, some of which are aligned upon time-limited funding. You referenced SPF, the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is obviously, as things stand at the moment, due to come to an end, I think, in 2025. So following on from Councillor Hooper's question, what steps are we taking to ensure that those projects that are dependent upon time-limited funding, things like Value in the Vale, the Great Glamorgan Way, how are we ensuring their sustainability? And again, it might be that you want to do a double act with Councillor Wilson if he's still on the call, since Councillor Hooper specifically referenced him. Thank you. Shall I bring Councillor Wilson in first as the Cabinet member to address those issues? Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much for your question, Councillor Hooper. I mean, I do agree. We do need to be pushing this agenda very much more. I mean, if you might have noticed, you've probably seen it while he recorded, that we are the second best country in the world for recycling now, just behind Austria. And obviously, this is very much due to the efforts of our residents within the Vale Glamorgan, achieving our targets, along with neighbouring authorities as well. And obviously, you know, we're working very hard on this. But as you know, I am one member of the Cabinet. We have collective responsibility in the Cabinet, as you know. So I'm happy to raise any points. And if you've got any points you want to articulate to me in an email, that would be also very helpful. And I can then pass them on to other Cabinet members. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Hooper, I think you want to come back in on that point.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I think I'm really pleased with our recycling targets that we're hitting so well. But that isn't that shouldn't be the answer that we keep coming up with when we start talking about climate change. It's good news, but this is a significant change that we need to see happening across everything we do, everything we should stop doing, everything we should start doing. It's a change that, and my concerns are I just don't think we've really grasped the metal hard enough. And my point that I was asking, and maybe Susanna will come to it, and I was hoping that Councillor Wilson would actually respond directly to this, is in this next corporate plan phase, this becomes probably one of the biggest things that this, if not the biggest thing this council does over the next 5 years. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Susanna, I don't think my point about reliance on time-limited funding has been picked up. I don't know who wants to respond to that. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, you are correct. I mean, obviously the reserve, the Project Zero reserve isn't time limited. That is a reserve that's been set up and can be accessed. What we've tried to do with shared prosperity funding, as one example, is to, if you like, maximise the potential of the Project Zero reserve by where we can helping out in terms of certain projects which meet the requirements of the Shared Prosperity Fund, but also meet some of the Project Zero requirements as well. The fact is, you're quite correct to say that currently Shared Prosperity, which was a replacement, allegedly, for the structural funds from the EU, does come to an end in March 2025. We remain hopeful that that will be continued and that a form may not be called Shared Prosperity Funding, may be called something different, but a form of funding will continue beyond that. There have been, I know, numerous parties who are in the middle of an election, but it has been discussed by numerous parties, and we will have to see the outcome to see what actually happens beyond that time. But I think what we've tried to do with Shared Prosperity is, certainly with some projects like Great Glamorgan Way, which you alluded to, ensure that the capital part of that programme is delivered within the timescales where it comes to an end. Now, a big part of that Great Glamorgan Way is making sure we have a long-standing network of footpaths and bridleways which can access beyond the Vale and all the key features of the Vale, but goes actually way beyond the Vale to our neighbouring authorities. And at the conclusion of that work in March 2025, we will have a network which allows us to do that. Clearly, these networks begin to deteriorate the minute they're finished, and I think that's something we will have to look at going forward. But where we have replaced funding from Project Zero with shared prosperity is with the express aim of trying to elongate the Project Zero fund. Just to come back on that comment about grasping the nettle about how much money is spent, I think it's a really fair point. We all know we're in a really difficult budgetary position at the moment. That doesn't look like it's going to get any better going forward. I think climate change is an absolutely key part of the corporate plan for 25 to 30. It has to be because of the declarations we've made, both in terms of climate and biodiversity. How achievable that will be dependent on how much funding is made available. So I think it's a really difficult point, and I think Councillor Hooper knows this. It is incredibly difficult, but it will remain an absolutely fundamental to what the council is trying to do. I think that's all I can say on that.
Thank you very much, Marcus. I don't think anybody else wants to come in on this, so Susanna, would you like to continue?
I just had a couple of things to add in relation to the question on resources, just to say that maximising external funding is a huge priority currently. So wherever anything comes up, our teams are all over that. Also, there's something around making the most of existing assets. So, for example, in schools that have got very smart technology in them currently, using our own monitoring systems to make sure that actually we're working really efficiently in the places where we do have those systems in place. So we shouldn't forget the fact that we've got some things in place and we want to make them work really hard for us too through behaviour change campaigns. So if I move on to the next section of the reports, I'm going to look at the Public Services Board briefly. So the Public Services Board, the Vale of Glamorgan Council and Natural Resources Wales co-chair the PSB's Asset Management and Climate Emergency Group. That group meets quarterly and reports back into the PSB. So that, in essence, is an opportunity to bring together all the PSB partners to share good practice and look at opportunities to work together. In November, we hosted an in-person workshop here at the council and reviewed the 5 relevant areas within the PSB Wellbeing Plan to explore what was working well within each organisation and where there were opportunities to strengthen collaboration. Some of the outcomes of that particular workshop were the opportunities to develop training programs that might work across different organisations. So there was, for an example, acknowledgement that some of those organisations were less confident when it came to the nature emergency. So looking to the future, our Vale Local Nature Partnership are looking to develop some training and to make that accessible to all of the PSB. So that's the kind of outcome that we want to see from that group. We're looking at redeveloping the current climate emergency charter. There's a recognition that, again, nature could be strengthened in that. So that's a piece of work that's come out of that group and we'll be working on in the next number of months. One of the other outcomes is that NRW have offered carbon literacy training to all of the PSB members. So it's just a nice way of demonstrating our shared working. So I'll stop there given time and give time for questions.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from anyone in relation to that? Just one from me. I think the report talks about the fact that progress has been slower than hoped for in terms of the work that's being done with PSB. So it would be helpful to understand what's being done to strengthen engagement around shared priorities with PSB partners. You've referenced already some of the training that's being delivered. Is there anything in addition to that?
Yeah, I think we'll come on to the appendix in a bit, and sometimes it's very difficult to make these judgments. Is it on track? Is it slower than expected? So we might have been quite hard on ourselves in judging it slower than expected. One of the reasons for that is we set ourselves a timetable for the year, and we'd hoped to be further ahead with the charter and with some of those key things, but it's just quite difficult to bring together different groups and the different expertise into the room to get us where we needed to be before we could go back as a group and look at redeveloping that charter. So we might have been slightly harsh on ourselves when it came to that, but over the course of the year, we're still confident that we will be on track with that. Also, there's a piece of work that Public Health Wales are leading on at the moment, a big funded piece of work with all PSBs across all of Wales. And that's going to be looking at particularly on key projects, climate being one of them, and how to integrate from systems-wide thinking. So over the 2-year period, we should hope to see some new ways of working coming through that programme. And a number of us from the Vale of Glamorgan Council sit within that programme.
Thank you for that clarification and reassurance, Susanna. I can't see anyone else wanting to come in, so would you like to continue? Oh, apologies. Councillor Prothero, did you want to ask a question? I'm not sure that you're with us.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Councillor Prothero. Please go ahead.
Back in the room. So it was just asking really, Susanna, about the PSB work. And I think Councillor Wilson has highlighted that when it comes to how we kind of like work with our local partners to buy things more locally, I'm just wondering if there is any work connected to something similar to the Preston model, community wealth building. It links into the Net Zero project, obviously, if we can do more locally and with our partners. So is the Preston model something that PSB is looking at? Thank you.
Susanna, would you like to respond to that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. So currently there's a report, the annual report of the PSB is being pulled together, and there will be a section in there on climate issues and some of the procurement work that's been happening across different partners. I'm not aware of any work along those lines, but we can certainly come back to you on that, and I can feed that back into the group when we next meet.
Thank you very much, Susanna. Is there one more section or 2 more sections? Forgive me, I've lost track.
There are 2 more sections, but I think we've probably covered a few of the questions that might come up.
No, that's fine.
That's okay.
Please carry on.
So my second last section was on the Appendix A. That's the lion's share of the report. It's the detailed progress from October 23 to March 24. I've touched on some of the highlights at the first part of the session. So just to say, we've got 80 steps that are in there and quite a detailed report on each of the steps. A bit of an update on what's been happening over the 6-month period. Some of the barriers, a RAG rating, whether it's on track, slower than expected progress or no progress. In some instances, there was no expected progress in that period. With a piece of work of this range, we wouldn't expect to see something happening in each of those 80 areas. Also the planned actions for the next 6 months. So they're generally on track. You'll see most of our, quite a lot on the green, but where there's slower than expected progress, we've touched on the PSB being slower than expected progress, and I've given you the reasons for that. We've got some areas, for example, challenge 11 on water, challenge 13 on procurement, where they are slower than expected. And capacity challenges would underpin a number of the slower than expected progress. We've also got slower than expected progress in housing. So there are things like contractor insolvency that have stopped progress, weather changes and technology failing. So just wanted to point out some of the reasons, some of the barriers to making that progress. In some of the steps, we've put slower than expected progress. For example, 5.2 was implement the biodiversity forward plan. This is where it gets really difficult to sometimes make a binary call on where progress is. Within 5.2, there's loads of brilliant work that's happening that I've mentioned already in green and blue space, but we know that we're not making the progress we needed to on implementing the biodiversity forward plan or writing a new one because of capacity issues. But I just wanted to point out that that doesn't mean there's lots of good stuff. There's lots of good stuff happening there as well. There are some no progress elements within the 80 steps. Again, that's due to staff resourcing. they produce a sustainable urban drainage guidance at 6.1. There's a barrier on that because of our lack of progress. 7.4, we saw that next bikes had been withdrawn, so there's no progress on there, but there is a kind of update on that and some next steps in place. Also 17.2, promoting and incentivising sustainable staff travel. There have been capacity barriers over this 6 months, but when you look to what's planned in the following 6 months, you'll see there's a lot there. So it's just to draw your attention to the ebb and flow, I think, of some of the work that's happening across Project Zero and the reasons why not all of it is on track. So I'll just leave some space for questions.
Thank you, Susanna. Councillor Hooper, please.
Thanks, Susanna. I'm really interested in SUDS in particular, and disappointed that that's fallen back, because it fits in with the tree strategy as well, from my perspective, especially when we're replacing or not replacing urban trees, and we could perhaps consider using SUDS in their place in some places. And I'm disappointed. I think you mentioned that there was a budgetary issue with the SUDS issue. Is that right, or was that related to something else? I wouldn't mind digging down to understand why that's where it is. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Susanna, is that something you're able to respond to? I think Miles is going to take it. Thank you, Miles.
Chair, essentially it relates to the SUDS legislation. So it is in place. It's part of the planning process for new developments. And we're working on a set of documents to provide to the public that explains this better. We put a bid in as a cost pressure for extra staff resource within this team, and we're unsuccessful because of the council's budget challenges, essentially. So we've got to see if we can move around resource within the drainage team to produce this document. It is a little bit of a saver for us, because it would avoid more contact from developers in particular. So we are planning on doing it. I just can't give a time frame to it at the moment, because we have to use existing resources. But I do accept Councillor Hooper's position. It is sadly needed. We just, with everything else that's going on with flood risk management and the like, it's just slipped off a little bit in terms of priority. But we will get to it.
Thank you. And just for the sake of anyone who doesn't know what SUDS is, we're talking about sustainable urban drainage guidance. Yes, thank you. Any other comments or questions from anyone in relation to that section of the report, please? No, I don't see any hands, so we'll move on to the final section if we may. Thank you, Susanna.
Thank you, Chair. The last section, appendix, the second appendix. So we'll report on this every year in our Project Zero report. It's the corporate performance indicators that are relevant for Project Zero. So as of last time, we haven't particularly looked to put in any new and additional performance indicators. We've looked at the ones that are already in existence, and we've pulled them out here so that you can see where they are relevant for Project Zero. They're broken down into the different sections, for example, green and blue space, planning and regeneration, and so on. Where we have added in new performance indicators, they're very linked to our carbon emissions, and that's to give them greater visibility. So we're aware we're collecting that data already, so we wanted to embed those into the new corporate performance indicators so we can see that rolling on year. We've also got some new performance indicators that we've added in on electric vehicle fleet charging and on PVs that are installed. So before this, we weren't really keeping a log of the numbers of PV installations, and that's a good indicator for some of the work that we're doing. It's a question that we're regularly asked, so to have that in the PIs will be really helpful. That's both in council housing and also in our other council buildings and assets. And I just wanted to mention that the last meeting, timelines were raised by our performance indicators and timelines in general about the Project Zero reporting. So just to make everyone aware that the corporate PIs aren't reported until July. So those PIs won't actually come back to Project Zero into this report until the following December. So we recognise there is a time delay on that. It's just because of the way that the reporting falls. So I'll leave for questions.
Thank you, Susanna. Any questions or comments in relation to that section of the report, please? No? I don't see any hands. Susanna Marcus Miles, thank you very much for taking us through it. I know we've had a lengthy debate on it, but I think, you know, that's indicative of how broad this agenda is, but also how important it is to this committee. Members, as you can tell, are very engaged with the issue. So thank you very much for the time that you've given us this evening to take us through that. There are a number of recommendations for committee. Recommendations that the Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee note the progress detailed in this report and Appendix A in relation to the challenges within the Climate Change Challenge Plan and the work of the Public Services Board. Our committee happy to note? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Secondly, that the committee note the RAG rating of progress from October 23 to March 24 in Appendix A. Happy to note? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. That the committee note the funding available in reserves and the projects awarded funding to date. Happy to note. Thank you. That the committee note the updated corporate performance indicators relevant to Project Zero at Appendix B. Happy to note, thank you. That the committee refer this report and any comments to Cabinet to be considered alongside the comments of the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee, who will consider this report on the 19th of June. That's tomorrow. I don't think we have any formal comments to feed back to Cabinet unless anybody would like to take the opportunity to make those now. Councillor Hooper.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder whether we should be looking at trying to bring this in, highlighting the concerns we've got in relation to the corporate plan process that's coming forward. So I think this is at the start of the process, wanting the Cabinet to understand that this committee is pushing for the agenda to be upweighted in the corporate plan. Now, I'm hopeful that the response we'd get would be, yes, this is where we see this as important as you do, but I think it was a good thing for this committee if it wishes to just make sure that those two things are linked.
So the recommendation is that the comment that should be fed back to Cabinet is that, if I understand you correctly, Councillor Hooper, I'm going to try and word this appropriately because I do think we've had a response to that this evening, but this will be something like that the Project Zero agenda should be front and centre in the corporate plan. Councillor Hooper is indicating he's happy with that comment being fed back to Cabinet. Is everybody else happy with that? Are there any dissenters? Councillor Prothero, are you supporting that? Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Prothero. So that comment will be fed back to Cabinet. And finally, that the committee recommend to Cabinet that this report is distributed to all elected members, members of the Public Services Board and all town and community councils for their information. Are we happy to agree with that recommendation? Thank you very much, Councillor Hooper. So, as I say, thank you, Susanna, Marcus and Miles. We do have one final agenda item, but do feel free to leave to enjoy the rest of your evening while we conclude the business of committee this evening. And many thanks for your time. As ever, very appreciated. So, committee, we move on to agenda item 7. This is the Cardiff Capital Region City Deal Joint Scrutiny Committee nominated deputy. Democratic Services Officer will take us through this, but essentially this is about this committee nominating a vice representative in the event that I'm not able as chair to attend the scrutiny committee. That nomination is something which has to be approved by full council. Mark, are you taking us through this? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee. Yes, as the Chair's already outlined, this report seeks the committee's approval or nomination of a named deputy representative on the Cardiff Capital Region City Deal Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee, known as JOSC. Subsequently, once that is confirmed by this committee, the nomination will be approved by full council. obviously I won't go into all the detail, but I just want to sort of tease out some of the key issues for consideration. Following the Council's annual general meeting on 8th of May, Councillor Lloyd Selby was reappointed chair of this committee and therefore remained the Vale of Glamorgan's JOSC representative. However, in line with that working agreement with JOSC, the Vale of Glamorgan Council is obliged to name a deputy representative. This is in order in circumstances where the scrutiny chair is not available, such a deputy can attend and vote at those meetings in her stead. Previously, we've had a councillor who was nominated previously as a deputy representative. Unfortunately, they're not a member of this committee now, hence we need to look at a replacement deputy in order to take over in that position. The named appointment of any deputy would cease should that councillor no longer be a member of this committee, just to stress that. And once a nomination has been placed in by this committee, the committee's recommendation will be formally decided by council at the current, I think, schedule for the 15th of July, the next meeting of full council. As part of the report, the JOSC terms of reference are also attached to the Appendix A. That's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Happy to take any questions, Chair, but obviously the next process then is to nominate an appropriate deputy.
Thank you very much, Mark. First of all, can I ask if there are any questions in relation to that process? Councillor Penn, did you want to ask a question? No, fine. In that case, can I ask for nominations, please, for the deputy? Councillor Penn?
Thanks, Chair. Can I nominate Councillor Catherine Iannucci-Williams, please?
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that, please? Councillor Prothero, you're wanting to second?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
I would like to second that. Thank you.
Councillor Ernest?
Yes, I'd like to nominate Councillor Charles Champion. I think it's important that we have a member of the opposition party in support of the joint city deal. So that's my nomination. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there a seconder for that nomination, please? Councillor Driscoll? Councillor Driscoll, are you wanting to second that nomination?
I believe that is the case, Chairman.
I think Councillor Driscoll needs to make that clear himself. Here we are. Councillor Driscoll, you're seconding that nomination. Thank you. So we have two people nominated, Councillor Catherine Iannucci-Williams and Councillor Charles Champion. So I assume we move to a vote?
Yeah, that's correct, Chair. Similarly, as we did previously before on nominating the Vice Chair, we'll do a vote on each nomination, and then obviously members indicate whether they want to go for that nomination or they don't. Okay, so as I understand, we currently got two nominees, Councillor Iannucci-Williams and Councillor Champion. So my colleague's setting up the vote now. So we're going to go firstly with the first nomination, Councillor Iannucci-Williams. So members will obviously indicate whether they support that nomination or not. Just to make clear that the voting has started, and you should have an indication on your device to vote.
So that's six votes in favour of Councillor Iannucci-Williams and 2 votes against. Do we move to vote around Councillor Champion next?
Yeah, Chair, well, that's correct.
Councillor Driscoll, just if you could switch off your camera, please. Thank you very much.
The vote has started, Chair.
Thank you. All votes cast, 2 votes in favour, 5 votes against and 1 abstention. So Councillor Iannucci Williams is nominated as the deputy, and that will go forward, as the officer has already explained, to full council for ratification. Thank you, committee. So formal recommendations are: we recommend Councillor nominated Deputy Councillor Iannucci Williams to represent the Council at meetings of the Cardiff Capital Region City Deal Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Can I have a seconder for that proposal, please? Thank you, Councillor Hooper. And the named deputy is entitled to vote at meetings of the Joint Scrutiny Committee in the absence of the chair of the Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee. Again, can I have a seconder for that recommendation? Thank you very much, Councillor Hooper. So thank you very much, committee. That concludes our business this evening. And it just remains for me to remind everyone that our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, the 16th of July at 6 o'clock. Thank you all very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.